Did you notice why the kindest people get used the most? It's not because they're weak, because they made their kindness unconditional and never taught anyone what it cost them. You're one of them. You already know it. You're the one who shows up, the one who remembers, the one who gives without being asked and somehow ends up exhausted while everyone around you seems just fine. And if you're kind and you keep getting used, this video is going to show you exactly why it keeps happening and how to stop it without losing who you are. Let me tell you something most people won't say directly. Being a kind person does not protect you from being treated badly. In fact, in certain dynamics, it makes you more likely to be treated badly. Not because there is something wrong with you, but because kindness, when it has no edges, becomes something people learn to rely on in ways that were never fair to you. Think about the people in your life who call when they need something, who seem to remember you exist most clearly when they are in crisis, who receive your attention, your time, your effort, and don't seem to register what that costs you, not maliciously, not always consciously, but consistently. And you keep showing up, because that's who you are, because it doesn't feel right to withhold, because the idea of someone needing you and you not being there, that feels worse than the exhaustion of always being there, that right there, that trade-off. That is the whole thing. That is the mechanism underneath all of it. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Here is something worth sitting with. Your kindness did not come from nowhere. For most people who give too much, the giving started as a survival strategy, not in a dramatic sense. Not necessarily in a house with obvious dysfunction. Sometimes it was subtle. Sometimes it was just the atmosphere. Maybe you grew up in an environment where your needs felt like too much, where keeping the peace mattered more than being honest about what you felt, when you didn't ask for too much, when you were the one who gave rather than the one who needed. And so you learned that generosity felt safer than need, that helping felt safer than asking, that your value, your place in a room, your place in a relationship was most secure when you were useful. That is an intelligent adaptation to an environment. It worked. For a long time, it probably worked very well. The problem is that you carried it forward, into friendships, into relationships, into workplaces, into every room you walked into as an adult, with a blueprint drawn in childhood that said, give and you will be wanted, help and you will be safe, make yourself useful and people will keep you close. And people did keep you close, but sometimes for the wrong reasons, and often at the wrong cost. There is a concept in psychology called the fawn response. The fawn response is the impulse to appease, to accommodate, to make the other person comfortable as a way of managing your own anxiety. When there is tension, you smooth it. When someone is upset, you try to fix it. When someone needs something, you provide it even when no one asked you to, even when you were already running on empty. This is not generosity in those moments. Or not only generosity, it is also underneath a way of managing a very old fear. The fear that if you are not useful, not accommodating, not endlessly available, something important will be taken away from you. Approval, love, connection, or safety. And the people who end up using kind people, they are not usually predators. They're not sitting somewhere calculating how to take advantage of you. Most of the time, they are just people who have learned very gradually that you will fill whatever gap exists, that they don't need to ask, that they don't need to reciprocate particularly carefully, because you will be there regardless. That is not their cruelty. That is the dynamic you both created. And that distinction matters, because if this is something you built even unconsciously, it means it's something you can change. Here's what chronic overgiving actually does to a person, not in a dramatic way. In the quiet, slow way that goes unnoticed for years, it builds resentment. Not the loud kind, not the kind you say out loud in arguments, the kind that sits somewhere underneath your generosity like a slow leak. The kind that makes you feel, at certain moments, a flash of something ugly when someone asks you for one more thing. And then you feel guilty for feeling it. And then you give anyway. And the leak gets a little worse. It distorts your relationships. When you give without boundaries, you never really know if people are there for you or for what you provide. That uncertainty, even if you never name it, erodes something. You start to wonder, in the quiet moments, whether the people in your life would still be there if you stopped being so available. And the fact that you don't know the answer to that question, that is its own kind of pain. It disconnects you from your own needs. When you spend enough years prioritizing everyone else, you genuinely lose track of what you need. Not because your needs aren't there. They're there. But they've been quiet for so long. Pushed aside so many times that you've stopped being fluent in them. Someone asks what you want, and you feel a genuine blankness, because that muscle has barely been used. And underneath all of this, a loneliness that doesn't quite make sense, because you're surrounded by people, you're needed, you're called upon. And still somehow, there is this feeling of being deeply unseen, of giving and giving and giving, and no one really asking how you are, and you wouldn't know what to say if they did. That loneliness is not a coincidence. It is the direct result of a life lived one step removed from yourself. Here is the reframe, and it is a simple one, but it takes time to really land. Unconditional kindness is not a virtue, it is a vulnerability. That doesn't mean kindness is wrong. Kindness is one of the most valuable things a person can have. But there is a difference between kindness that comes from a full, secure place and kindness that comes from the fear of what happens if you stop. The first kind of kindness has edges. It can say no. It can rest. It can sometimes choose itself without guilt tearing through it. It is given freely because the person giving it feels free, not because they are afraid of what they will lose if they don't give. The second kind, the kind most overgivers know, is performance masquerading as personality. It is anxiety dressed up as warmth, and it costs you in a way that real kindness never should. There is also this: you have been operating on the assumption that your value to the people around you is connected to your usefulness, that the way to be loved is to be needed, that the way to stay is to give more than you receive. That assumption is not the truth. It is a story, a very old, very convincing story, but a story. The truth is that people who are genuinely right for you, who have the capacity to meet you properly, do not need you to earn your place with them. They do not require your constant giving as proof that you belong. They are there because of who you are, not because of what you provide. And if you stripped away the overgiving, if you became less available, less immediately accommodating, less quick to sacrifice your own comfort for everyone else's, those people would still be there. They might even come closer, because what becomes visible when you stop performing your kindness is something more real and more worth being close to. So what does it look like to shift this? Not dramatically, not with a sudden coldness or a confrontation or a speech about what you've given. It starts with noticing. Before you give, before you say yes, before you rearrange your schedule, before you absorb someone else's discomfort, you pause, just for a moment. And you ask yourself, is this coming from a genuine desire to help, or is it coming from something older, from the fear of what they will think if I don't? You don't need to answer that question out loud, you just need to ask it, because the asking creates a small space between the impulse and the action. And in that space, something else becomes possible. You also start letting some things go unanswered, not out of cruelty, but out of an experiment. You let a message sit for an hour when you would normally respond instantly. You say, I can't this week, without a lengthy explanation of why. You let someone sit with their own discomfort, instead of rushing in to resolve it for them. And you watch what happens. In most cases, two things happen. The other person is completely fine, and you feel a strange, uncomfortable relief, like something that has been clenched for a long time just slightly loosened. Some relationships change when you do this. Some people fall away, or become cooler, or suddenly seem less interested. That information is painful, but it is also clarifying, because what it tells you is that the relationship was always more about what you did than who you were. And that is worth knowing, even when it hurts. Other relationships deepen, because the people who are genuinely there for you, they don't need you performing your kindness for them. They just need you. The actual you with the actual limits and the actual needs you have been quietly carrying alone. And then something stranger happens over time. You start to feel your own presence differently. Less like a function in other people's lives, more like a person. A whole person who gives when they choose to, who rests when they need to, who is allowed to sometimes be the one who needs. That is not a small thing. For someone who has spent years defined by what they give, that feeling of being a person first and a giver second is quietly enormous. So understand your kindness is real. That is not the problem. It was never the problem. The problem was that somewhere along the way, you started treating it like a debt you owed, like something you had to keep paying to people who never asked where it was coming from and never stopped to check what it was costing you. You are not responsible for managing everyone's comfort. You are not the person whose job it is to fill every gap, absorb every difficulty, and smooth every rough edge in every room you walk into. You are allowed to be kind and still have limits. You are allowed to love people and still say no. You are allowed to give genuinely, freely, without resentment, precisely because you are also allowed to stop. The people who deserve your kindness won't need it to be unconditional. They will be careful with it. They will give something back. Not because they are keeping score, but because that is what it feels like when the dynamic is actually right. If you found value in this video, hit subscribe to become the next Healthy Mind CEO.